there's all kinds of things.
Yeah, check your bag for the condiments, I think. Yeah, we'll ask. All right, that's enough wind up.
Yep.
Dave Chang.
Right. So there's a lot.
You don't have to cook?
No, thank God.
There's the one event where you don't have to cook for anybody, but there's a lot to get into. Media, tech, restaurants. Let's start with restaurants. You have expanded your empire quite a bit over the last decade, and I'm wondering, how do you decide what to say yes to? Because I'm sure you have way more opportunities than you can even handle.
Yeah. For about 10 years, there was no strategy. We did whatever we wanted to do. Our first restaurant outside the East Village was in Sydney, Australia, because we felt like it. And there was no strategic growth strategy, all these words that I've learned now.
You know how long that plane ride was.
Yeah, 21 hours. I've done it many times. And I think we did our best to not ever become a company with any kind of measurables and strategy, and now that's different. So we have, north of 1,000 employees total now, and what we say yes to is now a process. Because it was up to me, even though I think I say no to everything, I really don't. I say yes to too many things.
So how present do you think you need to be? How many places are you running right now? How many outposts of the Chang Empire are there?
Including Fuku, the fried chicken sandwich shop, is probably in the mid-20s now.
And then if we take Fuku out, just the traditional restaurants, it's a dozen?
Teens.
And so do you feel like you need to be in each one of those a certain amount of time each year for it to work?
Some that run better than others?
Yeah, I consider the real full-service restaurants to be, not that I have children yet, like children, in the sense that when you open up something new, they're like a newborn and you need to really look after it. And then we have some restaurants that are they pay their own taxes, they have their own jobs, and they need very little things, and you see them 2 or 3 times a year. And we have everything else in between. And I think a lot of how we manage now is because we have such a strong team. We've been in business now 15 years. I think we have many of my management team have been around 10 plus years. So it's just getting to understand that philosophy, and I think I'm trying to be a better delegator, which I didn't quite understand what that meant until I think the past couple of years.
So you're like, a lot of these folks here run software businesses or invest in them, and they're used to the idea of you make the thing and then you scale it, right? You make it once and you can sell it a lot of places. You could argue that you could do that too, right? Because you're a brand and you could just churn out stuff and attach your name and maybe drop by once a year. And is that and I mean, other people who do what you do have a version of that, right?
Yeah.
Do you want to do that?
In we have a board meeting, and someone said recently that, hey Dave, it's sort of not a joke, but a joke, you're the worst business person I've ever met. And that was sort of the idea that I have an aversion to scaling something, and I've sort of worked my entire career not to scale something. We even have a scalable concept named Fuku, and every iteration is different. And it's the same thing, but I just want to make it better and better and better to the point where we can scale it. But what I've learned is the idea of scaling something over and over and over again, while it's interesting to me, I don't want to physically be the person doing it. I want to be the person or create the team to help make it better.
So even in Vegas or in DC, it's not going to be a greatest hits. It's its own very specific.
We have done the greatest hits in Washington, D.C., and it didn't work.
Right.
And we blew it up and we put a new chef in, and we've just got a great review. So it's completely different than the tech business, because scaling a brand in food, yes, it can work at McDonald's or if you have a beverage, but the idea of scaling, something that's intimate and some kind of contract between you and a prospective diner, that's hard, because we're still trying to be best in class in making the most thoughtful, delicious food, and it's hard to scale excellence, I think.
So dumb question, if you're not super oriented towards scale and maxing it out.
But I am.
Okay.
But I'm just trying to figure out how. Yeah, I'm learning how to do it.
But to what end? Like you strike me, maybe it's just the brand, right? As like someone who likes being in the kitchen and playing around with stuff. And what is the point of adding to the empire? You're doing really well now. Why do you want to keep pushing it out?
You know, we've turned down offers to sell and to scale, right? I've never got into legitimately food to make money, as weird as that might, I mean, now it's like a cool job, but I was probably the last, era where you got in because you couldn't really do anything else. And now, because I shouldn't be here talking to you guys in a room full of fancy pants, super successful people, I know how lucky I am, and the fact is, what I've learned after 15 years of doing momofuku is that what brings me happiness, because I'm sure and many people know, like, I'm not like the happiest person. I could have the best day in the world, but I'm always like, oh, we could do this better, we could do this better. I want to be able to make a company better, to provide for the people around me, and that makes me happy, right? And I think scale, because restaurants are notoriously, like, we don't have the margins that tech has. We just don't. Across the board, food should be more expensive, but people aren't ready to accept that yet. Until that can happen, we have to figure out how to create enough profitability so we can provide for all of our employees.
Could fuku become that? Could you
Yeah,
put fuku as like a 300?
Can you tell people what fuku is in case they haven't seen it?
Oh, fuku?
Yeah, in case they haven't had a fuku in their life.
Oh, fuku is just our take on fried chicken sandwich. And it's done in a sort of more of an Asian context, or you could even just look at it as a liberal Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A was the model too, right? You love Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A, but the reality is you can do it better. It's like once you see how they do it, it's not that great. I'm not trying to say it's not delicious, but like I think you can make it better, and that's our attempt to do it. And we now have a team, and it's now siloed off, and it has its own financing. And when I say I don't want to scale it, I want to do it in a way that I think is better and more thoughtful. Bless you. And I think it's going to take time. And we have 9 locations. We have like many more online. So while I'm telling you no, we're not scaling it, we are definitely scaling it. I'm just not comfortable in saying that it's a set model.
Got it.
Right. And what about the culture as you expand to so many different markets? How do you think about that? I know you've said that like the chemistry between the staff is almost as important as the technique.
That's been incredibly difficult, right? We just opened up in Los Angeles in downtown, and it's been, I think, all of my experience to be the best version of myself. And over the years, I've had to become a better manager of people and to realize that my communication skills are not very good, and that people are working incredibly hard for us because, number one, they need to provide for themselves, but number two, they want to have opportunities moving forward. And a restaurant group, even if it's super busy, may not have the complexities or the systems you might see in a white-collar job. And the biggest difference that I'm trying to tackle right now is, and again, with everything that's happening in the world today, is how do you balance out what's essentially still a blue-collar labor, which is cooking, which is now glamorized to the point where it now has white-collar values.
Right.
And that's a collision that's hard to mitigate and to sort out, and that's what I'm trying to figure out myself.
When you say white-collar values, can you elaborate on that a little more? You mean like how much people expect to be paid, or the
From
benefits?
pay to benefits to also the hours you work, to any kind of benefit, right? Like, we're going through a lot right now. Like, many restaurants don't even have an HR program, right? Like, I'm sure many of you guys have too many HR people, right? We would love to have that problem. And I'm trying to figure out like how that works, because everyone has an understanding of food now. The food awareness is higher than ever before, but no one quite wants to understand how that food gets made, right? They understand it maybe from an environmental perspective, but they don't understand it from the restaurant perspective. And there's a lot that needs to be not just elevated, but like thoughtfully brought up.
Part of the appeal, I think, for cooking is reputationally, right? Like, it's a fun place for people, young people to hang out, and you get to drink a lot and hang out with your coworkers, and maybe you have sex with your coworkers. And are you, over time, are you trying to make that a little more square and a little more white collar, or do you figure that people are going to do what they're going to do?
Well, yeah, I've been so allergic to a corporate body for so many years. Now I think I've convinced myself it's the only way to go. And we have to be the most efficient and most thoughtful way, company of how we organize people. Part of that is how we structure our cooks, our back of the house, our front of the house, the servers, to having systems in place. I think the balance is to make sure that we don't become entirely systemized. So my job is to fuck it all up, in the sense of we want to be 100% committed to creating a white collar environment. What I mean by that is hey, you can only have one shift drink at the end of service. You have to take an hour break. That's non-negotiable. You have to do this and this. You have to take certain vacation days. We have systems. We are more thoughtful than ever in terms of tallying data of our employees to make sure, hey, you haven't taken vacation days. Why is that? Certain things like that.
So it was professionalizing.
Yeah, it's professionalizing. That's what I mean.
Been.
And I think it might be hard for people that aren't of the restaurant world to be whoa, you guys are really in the dark ages. Yes, we are. My fear is that once you become too systemized in the restaurant industry, you're going to lose any of the coolness, creative parts. I got into cooking because it was so on the, it just wasn't cool, Everyone thought it was career suicide when I said, hey, I'm going to start to cook. So it was that sort of sense of danger, sense of recklessness that no longer really exists, right?
But it could make it more inclusive for more people now.
Exactly. And that's what I've been wrestling with all of this change that's been happening, is what needs to get better. And I think for a long time I thought if things become professionalized, then food will be less delicious. And I think I was 100% wrong in that, because I kept on putting myself in the center of that equation. And having balance, you work long hours in the culinary world. And I've always believed that the culinary world and those that lead people in the culinary world have maybe one of the hardest jobs, because you can't motivate people with a giant stock option package or a giant bonus that you might get on Wall Street. You gotta motivate someone to do physical, hard labor and to try to get better at that through sheer integrity and personal will. And that's hard. That's incredibly hard to motivate people. And one of the things that I think is different is maybe you can't just force someone to do something that they don't want to do. You have to encourage them to do that. And that's something I think that the professionalism that's happening in restaurants is now, I'm seeing that benefit. Because I worked under regimes that were incredibly brutal.
It's like a hazing culture, right?
Yeah, and it's very secret. You're never going to hear stuff that happened because it's a rite of passage. I can't justify anything that happened, but what happened and how you learned how to cook then is very, very different now.
How much of your thinking has changed because of Me Too and overall, then the restaurant industry in particular? There's a lot of high-profile stories. Mario Batali, many others. Amanda's written about a lot of them, about your industry and the abuse has affected your thinking.
To be completely honest, which I've been the entire time here, is the fact that we've been trying to figure out how to make this better for many years, because our labor force has been changing. I've been joking, I've been working with millennials since they were millennials, they could work. And now the 18-year-olds are now 28 years old. And their value system and how they want to perceive the world is different. And once we saw that they were allergic to the working conditions and the stress that we were creating, we created symposiums. That's why we created MAD, this thing we host in Copenhagen with other chefs, to be able to communicate hey, things are changing, we need to make it better. And just because we came up under a brutish system doesn't mean that we can justify moving forward. So it's been on our minds for a long time, and I'd like to say that's one of the positives that the culinary world, at least the leadership I believe around the world, has been thinking about. is that what worked for them in the past wasn't going to work moving forward in terms of how you were going to, get new employees to like care about it. This year, starting with John Besh, and then Amanda's team at Eater really changed the perspective of everything. And I don't think it changed how we were thinking about it, but it changed the fact that the entire industry, whoever covers it, whoever goes in the restaurants or supports restaurants, now has to believe that the things that they didn't care about matter quite a bit.
Right, and it's not just your company, but it's also like you were friends with some of these guys. Like, has it had to change your way of dining and I don't know?
Yeah, it's been really difficult for myself because I've been friends with a lot of the people that have been exposed from the Me Too movement, not just in the culinary world. And I've been wrestling with myself as to what it says about me. Could I have done things differently? I don't know. I think all of us are trying to figure out what we could have done or said and have that dialogue. And that's the only thing I know I can do right now is to make our own company better and to learn from the mistakes of others. When it comes to the regards of someone like Mario Batali, it's still something I don't know how to comprehend because everything he's done has been like, there's just a recent revelation more on Eater today about Mario, and it's not just disheartening. You're like, Jesus Christ, this is so hard to read, because simultaneously, I don't know if we would be in business today without Mario's support. So I feel obligated to recognize that, but also like, what do I do with the opportunities I have now? And the only thing I think I can do with the platform that we have is to be the best in class business with the most thoughtful, forward-thinking culture, knowing that we're never going to be perfect, but that's always been our goal, because right now, I think a lot of people are downtrodden in the covering it or working in it. It's been really tough for everyone. It's been demoralizing, and how I can make sense of any of it is to make sure our business is best in class.
Amanda, you're talking about, should we cover restaurants that have abusers running them? Should you go eat at restaurants where that's the case? Do you have advice for folks here? And personally, what are you thinking about, if it's a restaurant where someone's been accused of that? Do you want to avoid that place? Do you want to go to support the remaining team?
It's a really great question, and how I've internalized it is, you should all ask yourself this before you eat something. You should ask, where did it come from? How was it raised? What was the provenance? Don't just put it blindly in your mouth. Mm-hmm. And more than ever in 2018, it's funny, like ethics and morality are more important than ever.
How are the employees treated? What is the culture
exactly here? And I don't think it's going to be that hard, but just ask around or just read about it. And it's funny. I was about to say, like, hey, if they treat their animals right or like their product right, but now with other allegations in like Oakland and like there's other restaurants that did everything right except take care of their employees, and I don't know what that answer is.
Well, and that was an obsession for so long in this industry, was the provenance of the food, and people are now finally talking about the labor and the treatment and the culture.
And it's not just hard to talk about, it's hard to wrap my head around. And as a company, we have to get better. We've had shortcomings in communication, and just because I believe my intent has been right, like what our company should be, but we have so many different kinds of employees, and it's so hard because part of it is we need better resources. We need to, quite frankly, make more money to be able to invest it back in. And how a customer will decide where to eat, I think that's going to have to happen from journalists and Eater, and to be able to support these newsrooms that are dedicating a lot of resources to uncovering the truth.
So we could talk about this forever, but I do have burning